Good morning. Here's my last set of reflections about this particular workshop. I'm particularly looking at week 3. What came up in this week particularly was a heavy emphasis about reflection and how to improve the quality of reflection. And there are, I think, a number of different ways in which we can improve reflection and move the student towards critical reflection. And with the critical reflection, I mean not just the student being egocentric and reflecting just about themselves and how they develop, which is important, but also how the impact that what they've done, particularly in the area of service, has had on other people, and their own ability to actually evaluate in a fairly objective way what they've done. So there are a number of ways in which we can actually help students to reflect. One of the key things, I think, is, of course, modelling it ourselves, which several of you suggested in your posts. Another one is, of course, doing things like role plays with the students, looking at having interviews, providing vocabulary for the students to actually use. And I think one other thing which is really important that's come through is getting the kids to focus on a few of the learning outcomes, not all of them at once. And in several of the reflections that I saw from ManageBack, what I saw were students trying to tick the box of all of the learning outcomes, and where it wasn't particularly relevant to the activity or the experience that they're actually having. So I think it makes some good sense for the students to actually get to focus on just 2 or 3 learning outcomes in each of their reflections. And I think one of the things which we'd have to say is that it's that of all the reflection the kids do, probably the most valuable are the 3 compulsory interviews which you have with the students. And I think these need to be really well prepared, both from your point and from the student's viewpoint. And each of these interviews has a different character. In the first interview, what you're really trying to do is find out what the student is interested in, what they're capable of doing, and what they might be interested in trying for the first time. The second interview is much more about checking where they are, and I would say you probably have this towards the end of the first year of the IB diploma at your school. And what you're looking at here is to see, first of all, how they've carried out the CAS stages in planning and investigating things, and secondly, how well they've met the learning outcomes, and getting them to explain how they've actually met the learning outcomes. In many reflections that I've read, it's the students say that they've met the requirement, the learning outcome, but they don't actually say how they've actually met that learning outcome. So I think that's something that's really important to stress with the students in that second interview. I'd also be looking at this stage in the second interview to see that the students have actually planned when they're going to carry out their project, if they haven't already done that. The last interview is this really. I think it's an opportunity to reflect on the students' overall CAS program. Has it been balanced? Have their reflections developed over time, however they've been presented? And how have they met the learning outcomes? And for this particular part, I think it's really important that we're clear about the areas where it's not so evident they've actually met the learning outcomes. In many cases, it's normally learning outcome 6 and learning outcome 7, where the kids have had difficulty explaining how they've actually met the learning outcomes. Now, don't forget that ethical issues can arise in both creativity and activity, not just in service. And I think you need to be aware of that. One other thing which I think is worth looking at this stage is about the portfolio and being clear about what the expectations are for the portfolio itself. First of all, you need to have some sort of record within the portfolio of all of the activities that the students have actually carried out. That way, a person, for example, from an evaluation team that sees this can get a clear picture about the balance of the students' programs, and it also suggests that you've kept good records of what's actually been going on. So it's a double-edged sword, in a way, about this. The second thing that you'd be looking for in a portfolio is evidence that the students have actually carried out the activities they have. And this may come in a whole range of different things. It could be letters of commendation, certificates they've received, photos they've got, and video of the activity, or it could be a podcast, for example. There are lots of different types of evidence that could be included in the CAS portfolio. And then, of course, we expect to have the students have reflections within the portfolio. And how these are actually, what media you choose, is really up to the schools. But it is important that there is some evidence there of the CAS interviews actually being carried out. Now, I think the evaluation team would also be interested to see if there were specific forms that the school had designed within the portfolio. This again reflects your personal organisation. I personally, when I was reviewing CAS programs, used to find that the reflections of the kids were actually gave me a very clear idea about the sort of support there was within the school for CAS. So those are some of the things that I think I would be looking for, and in terms of knowing when a student has actually finished CAS, I'd be looking for all this evidence. I'd also wanting to know that they've made a sort of persistent commitment. And in terms of a balance of activities and a number of activities, I would expect them to have done over a CAS program probably 9 or 10 activities or experiences and a project which they've carried out. If you think about that over 2 years, that's probably 3 different experiences each semester of the IB, which is not really that demanding for the students. Okay, the last week, as you'll hear from Peter Muir, is really focusing on ethics and how they affect students doing CAS. Now, one thing to clarify with you, the software Powtoon is to actually help you to make up a storyboard, a video about an ethical issue. And you may have other forms of software that you use for this, and if so, please use them. And one of the other things that you're asked to do in this last in this last week of the learning engagements is that you're also asked to look at articles of ethical behaviour, ethical service projects in the community. And lastly, you're expected to evaluate your own CAS program using the diagram which comes from the CAS guide and see what you need to do to develop it a bit further. last point I'm going to make is really about fulfilling the completion requirements. Next week, on Wednesday, we would hope that everybody has actually completed the CAS requirements by Wednesday the 5th of June. I will look at CAS, look at this workshop up until Saturday the 8th of June, and then I won't look at it again. And by that stage, I will have expected you to have met the requirements for the course in full. I hope that's clear. Goodbye, and good luck for the last week.